Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show where we talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and join me as I talk to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. Let's Talk Near Death.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Today I'm talking with Lisa Jones. She's an author and a speaker based in Hawaii, also known as the Millionaire Medium. Today she's going to be sharing her NDE experience, which is actually a shared death experience. So Lisa, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your experience. What is a shared death experience and how did this all happen?
Absolutely. So it was February 22nd, 2004, and my husband had been going through a 7-year battle with lymphoma cancer. He had had 3 stem cell transplants and multiple rounds of chemotherapy and radiation, and just nothing was going to work. So we had called hospice in. It was on a Saturday, and they arrived and said, he actually looks pretty good, and this might be another couple weeks before he passes. And I was beside myself. That morning he had woken up and was unable to, function. He wasn't speaking. He couldn't get up and go to the bathroom or, do anything for himself. And I just suddenly found myself, after all these years of him still being very functional, to just, not. And so that night, his brother and best friend actually arrived. I had been taking care of him and my 2 children by myself for those 7 years, but they came that night. And so I was able to go sleep in my daughter's room, and they sat with him. And I just prayed to God and the angels and just said, please help us. I can't do this. There's nothing we can do at this point to save him. So please help us in this time. And I closed my eyes and went to sleep. Well, while I was sleeping, all I can say is that I was taken out of my physical body. My spirit left my body, and it still makes me emotional to this day because I was taken to heaven, for lack of a better word. But it was the most beautiful, pristine experience I've ever encountered in my lifetime. It's more real than this world is here. The colors were more just vibrant, and there's I can't even give you words for the colors because there are none. There were hundreds and hundreds of souls that were gathering together, and there was a loud announcement saying the Grand Mr. Ian Sharp is about to arrive. And that's my husband's name, is Ian Sharp. And I felt like I had some spirit guides with me that were kind of escorting me to this place. And I felt like I was just being given this gift of seeing him welcomed to the next realm. And again, just to a little bit more description, it was almost like a castle environment. That's the closest, because it had like giant thick walls, and there was just such substance to it. But they were gleaming. They were golden and platinum and silver, and just these beautiful colors. And there were banners flying. And again, all these souls were coming together. And just as this giant door started to open, it was like scraping on the ground, and all the souls all at once turned and looked at the wall or the door as it was opening, and just started cheering, "He's here! He's here! He's arriving now!" And so he just was stepping through, and it's like, if I can remember, it's almost like I saw his foot just leading forward, and then all of a sudden, "Wake up, Lisa, knock, 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 wake up, wake up. Ian has taken his last breath." And it was like a trap door just opened, and I just fell. It felt like I just completely fell right into my physical body. And I opened my eyes, and I jumped out of bed, and I was so happy because I had seen where he was going. And I literally didn't know that, I didn't know how I was going to feel when he died. I mean, I truly thought I thought he was going to go to hell because he hadn't been baptized. I was very religious. He refused to be baptized. And I was beside myself, and all of my grandparents were still alive, except one had died when I was very young. But so I had no experience with death until that night. But, and then it got even better after that, if you want me to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to know all of it.
Well, the next part, just so many things happen, and it's all, I have the book called The Art of Living Happy After the Loss of a Loved One. All the details are in there, but I'm just giving you the highlights. Basically, the next morning, and the reason I have my title Millionaire Medium, this is what's behind that, is that the next morning I had to go tell my children. They had slept at their grandmother's the night that he died. So I had to gather myself together and go and tell them that he had actually died. And I was beside myself. I just thought, oh my God, even though I'm happy I saw where he's going, great, but his children now have to be told. So I was blow drying my hair. And as I was thinking about that, all of a sudden his voice, clear as a bell, was in my left ear. And he's like, oh my God, Lisa, I love you, but it's so awesome here. And I dropped the blow dryer. I turned around. I mean, I still get goosebumps when I tell the story because it was so real. And so I knew that he was where I'd seen him going, so that's the medium part. So I became a millionaire and a medium the night that my husband died, because the other part of it was he was a corporate executive for a large company, and I didn't know it, but he had $1 million life insurance policy on his life.
Okay. Yeah.
And so then that's how I got the Millionaire Medium name. And then ultimately those were two things that I had a really hard time grasping and understanding that was now my life, because as much as I was very religious, this whole idea of spirituality and connecting to angels and talking to dead people, which all started happening, I didn't know how to deal with that, as well as I didn't know how to deal with having $1 million and what it meant to, how to take care of that and who to trust and not trust. And so ultimately my guides, after several years, said, you need to own this name, Millionaire Medium, and fully embrace it. So that's kind of where that happened.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Wow. Okay, I want to backtrack a little bit. Yes. Can you tell us, so you talked at the very beginning that you came up out of your body. You were asleep at the time, you came up out of your body.
Yes.
Were you aware of what was going on, or was there confusion? What was happening?
It was confusion, because I was so distraught that, when I prayed and before I laid down to sleep, I mean, I was just really beside myself. Like I said, I didn't know how to deal with this, and they said 2 to 3 weeks, and I was trying to process how to physically do this next 2 to 3 weeks. And so that's when, thinking back, it's almost like my spirit came out of my body, almost like looking back at me laying down. I remember so clearly seeing my body laying in my daughter's bed. It had a canopy over it and everything, but then boom, I was in this other realm, and it was glorious.
Wow. Magical. So, and were you aware that your husband was with you? Were you aware that it was about him, not you?
Yes, I was, because when I got there and it was almost like a party that, everybody was just gathering for. And especially with the announcement, the Grand Mr. Ian Sharp is about to arrive. I mean, that was the most stunning event of it, I think, was to hear that and to know that everybody there was gathered for his arrival. It was his welcome home party, if you'll say.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And did you go through you didn't talk about a tunnel, any transition from this world up to there?
No, I didn't see a tunnel. It was just an almost immediate, I love these questions because you're really making me think critically about it. And it's almost like I remember it was like I went to sleep and then boom, flash, out of my body, but then bright light and just right through it. Like it wasn't a tunnel. It was almost like I was taken directly, to the other side.
Yeah. Wow. It's such an amazing experience, because I think going through losing a loved one is just so painful. And yet you came back and you were like, woohoo, I'm so happy for him.
And this is
Yes.
something I experienced when I lost my own father, was just the feeling of, this is awful, because I miss him and I loved him dearly. I still love him. But just this feeling of absolute grief. But on one hand, you've got all this joy because you're like, well, go them. That's amazing. Good on them. So how was it in your grieving process? Did you feel, I don't know how to word this. For me, I had times where I was like, I'm not grieving hard enough, or I'm not going through the regular pathway of grief. What would you say to somebody who's just lost somebody and perhaps going down that path?
Yes, I feel like it was such a gift for me, because I call it my divine dispensation, because I think if I had thought that he went to hell, that I really would have struggled so much more in this lifetime, and not just the idea of that, which to me now I know is not true, that there is not a hell, that we all go to the light. And, again, I don't know how it works or why or whatever, but that's my belief, because that's what I experienced. But as far as somebody, grieving, if you haven't had the experience, I think it's so helpful to listen to like your show, because it helps people understand that there are, that there is something beyond here. And even if they haven't experienced it specifically, that you can hear enough stories to help open your mind and to go on your own path. Meditation is a great way to be able to go through that veil and to be able to connect to the other side. And I do think that our society about grief it's so much about the fear and the loss rather than the light and the love. And I just recently had the analogy, it kind of was brought to me by my guides, is, when a baby is being born out of a birth canal, it's coming out of a really tight squeezed spot, right? That's just like, oh, get me out, and boom, into this world. And it comes out into this giant world. Well, very similarly, from everything I've heard about near-death experiences, that when people leave their body, it's almost like they feel like they've left an old tight shoe, or an old, or like a closed in closet or something. And then suddenly they've been birthed into this next realm. And so I love that idea that when someone dies, it's not an ending, it's a beginning for them. It's their new beginning. We're the ones that are left having to deal with, life without them. And I think, like you said, losing your dad, the same thing. I was so happy for Ian, and I was so sad for myself and my children.
That's it. It's always harder for us because we're left in this world and we're not the one who's been through the transition. I strongly believe that it's harder for us. Yeah.
That's right.
How has it been since then? Like, that's a pretty incredible experience to go through, but not just going through the experience of going up to heaven and having that spiritual experience, but you've lost a loved one. You've become a millionaire. Is that when your gifts tapped open, your medium gifts? And tell us about what's been like since.
Well, it was really interesting. Yeah, the way that all kind of unfolded, because I think, as you might know too, when somebody has a near-death experience, it takes several years for it to really unfold and to open up. And so for me, I was 37 when my husband died. He was 44. So he was 7 years older than me. And a week before he died, he told me, I so regret my life's work. He was a tax attorney for a large corporation. And he said, I wished I had helped more people. And that broke my heart. And yet, what did I do after he died? I went back to my accounting job, and I worked at a hedge fund, and I was pushing numbers around on pieces of paper. And it wasn't until I was approaching my 44th birthday that I suddenly had this realization that, oh my God, I'm doing the same thing that Ian did. I'm just, I'm not helping more people. I'm just, doing numbers, which is what he did. So I quit the hedge fund just after my 44th birthday. And that's when everything opened up. I mean, meanwhile, during those 7 years, I was on a spiritual path. I started doing feng shui, and all of these things just started falling into my lap. I called them, like little breadcrumbs that just kept opening and opening and opening. And so when I finally quit the hedge fund, all of a sudden I was offered to sponsor Gabrielle Bernstein, she's got several books at the Ridgefield Playhouse. And so I showed up there, I did my little card readings, and I was offered my own stage show. So
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, right. 150 people showed up to the first one, and then 500 the next year. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I did a radio show just outside New York called Monday Morning Medium. I was a guest on their 7 a.m. drive time radio show, which was so much fun. And I pulled cards and then I wrote my book, Art of Living Happy. So everything just really unfolded so amazing after that.
Yeah. And were you still hearing from your husband? He talked to you while you're drying your hair?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. He still talks to me. And in fact, just recently, my son just graduated from a university here in the United States, and their college football team went to the national championship. And my son was here visiting me in Hawaii, and he was debating whether to go or not. And so I heard from my husband, he's like, well, I'm going to help them win. And I'm like, okay, whatever that means. And so my son reluctantly went because they weren't favored to win. So he didn't want to fly there and go just to see his team lose. But anyway, the final score was 44 to, I think, 16. My husband was 44 years old when he died. He died on February 22nd, so 2/22, which is, time multiplied is 44. In the year 2004. I'm like, oh my God, I think you actually did help this team win. So it was just crazy.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you still very much feel him in your life today. And
absolutely,
you must miss him, but do you still have that comfort that everything's okay?
Yes, I still miss him, and yet he's so with me all the time. I mean, he's the sign for him is a dragonfly. And I cannot tell you how many times, just out of nowhere. In fact, even today, I was just down at the beach. I hadn't seen a dragonfly in months, and one just came over my head, and that's him. Just in the physical world, he shows up in the physical world all the time. And in fact, this morning I woke up to go to the bathroom, and it was 4:44 a.m. So I'm like, there he is. Those are my signs for him.
Yeah. Do you know what the 4 number means in terms of angel numbers and things like that?
Well, from my understanding, or from my own personal use, it's all about family, and it's all about the four pillars of foundation. So for me, it's all about family and just foundation.
Yeah, that's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lisa, can you take us back? Can you take us back to your childhood? You talked about how you were raised in a religious family.
Yes.
How does this work? Because I understand, well, if I understand correctly, the things that you're doing today don't necessarily correlate with the beliefs or the ways that you were raised. So how do the two work together, and how did you step from what you were raised in to where you are now?
Great question. So as a child, I was raised in the Lutheran religion, and my mother ultimately married a Lutheran minister. So it was very prevalent in my household, although he wasn't a practicing minister, but we would go, and I was part of the youth group and the youth leader actually in my Lutheran church. And it was very much about following the rules and, just I felt like I lived in a box, about rules, and that was it. But interestingly, when I was 6 years old, I had gone with a friend to her church, and I don't even remember what it was, a Methodist church or something. It doesn't even matter. But their Sunday school teacher just said, God is always with you, and you can talk to God whenever you need. So if you're ever in trouble, just pray, and he'll be there. Well, just a couple of weeks later, I found myself at a YMCA camp, and I was about 6 years old, and one of the counselors was taking a ball and just bouncing it off my head. The counselor was probably 14 years old, but as a 6-year-old, you're thinking it's an adult and that he's doing this to me. So it scared me. And so I ran into the building, and I thought, and he was chasing me into the building. So I ran into the ladies' locker room, and I was afraid he was going to come in there. So I jumped into a locker and closed the door so that I was inside. My knees were up to my chest, and I was safe in the locker, right? Until I realized there was nobody else in the locker area. It was like near the end of the day. And I was stuck. I couldn't get out. And I started screaming and crying, and I kicked my right leg out through the door. So it was being rubbed from my ankle all the way up to my high thigh, and nothing, it was just, I was stuck and frantic. And so probably after, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes of that, I remembered what the Sunday school teacher said, to just pray to God and ask for help. So I folded my hands together, and I I just said, dear God, please help me. I'm stuck. And at that moment I looked down and there was just a little something that I flicked with my finger and the door burst open. And as a 6-year-old, you can imagine that was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, he
literally. Yeah.
So from that point on, I knew I had a direct connection to God. I mean, there was nothing else, that could dissuade me from knowing that. And I read the Bible when I was 6 years old. I mean, I just was very, very much into God, but also into all the rules about you have to be baptized and you have to do all that. So when this all unfolded with my husband, I literally just my foundation crumbled. And in fact, I was an Episcopalian at that time when he died, and my priest came over the next day, and all he talked about was that he was retiring and he didn't know what to do with his books. And meanwhile, he wasn't talking to me about my husband that had just died less than 8 hours earlier.
Yeah.
And so I turned my back basically on the church and started walking this path with a direct connection and just allowing, kind of whatever to show up. And it's so amazing. I mean, there's miracles. Like I said, I used to live in a box. I felt like it was a TV set with 3 channels, black and white. And now that I'm living this spiritual path, it's like, surround sound, just the biggest screen ever. And all these, it's just amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. And have you ever had any kind of secondary glimpse of heaven? Have you been up in that experience again?
Well, I've had a couple of experiences. One, actually, it was just about 6 weeks after my husband died, and he came to me in full apparition.
Oh,
and
wow.
it was actually Easter, the night before Easter, and which to me has so much symbolism around, Jesus rising and all of that. But it was the first holiday with my children, and he always loved to hide the Easter eggs and do all of the fanfare around holidays. But I realized, that was falling on me. So I was looking outside the window. It was at night and it was starting to drizzle. And normally we hid the eggs outside. And I thought, oh dear, what am I going to do? I was just really, really, really sad at that moment. And I turned around and there he was standing in his full glory of like his best weight possible. As he had all of his hair, he had gotten down to less than, he was probably just around 100 pounds when he died. And so anyway, he was just there in his just full glory. And he just telepathically said to me, you've got this, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I just stood there, and he walked forward and just walked right through me. It was like, just, this ghost that just walked right through me. And then he came behind me and he went over and lay down on the bed right where he had died. And I lay down on the bed next to him, and I just was gazing at him, and just, again, we were just telepathically connecting.
Yeah.
And he was just telling me how much he loved me, and that's all that mattered, and then all of a sudden his body just evaporated right into the bed. Yeah. And so as much as it wasn't like that heavenly experience, it was a connection so clear and so connected to the spirit world. It's like I felt like this portal had opened, and he was right there.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. I've literally got goosebumps as you're talking. I was like, oh, whoa, literally I'm covered in goosebumps right now. That is so beautiful. I love that. I love it. Is there anything else in your experience? Did you go anywhere? Or you talk about, I think you called it a castle, where you talk about it was gold and it was shining and it was just emanating love and light. Did you see anything else, or was all of the experience there?
It was pretty much there. The interesting thing that I've found is I've started working and talking with many people that have had near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. And what people say is, oh yeah, you were in the castle or in the, I forget, maybe that's what they call it, but I've heard several people talk about these rolling meadows that they see a castle. Yeah. And that I was on the inside of the castle, and that they were kind of, they weren't allowed to go in because they didn't cross over. And so that has blown my mind. I think that's part of it for me, is that this happened to me 15 years ago. And it's only been in the last year and a half that I've started really interacting with people that have had near-death experiences. And I'm finding all of these puzzle pieces that are fitting together that I didn't
I
even
know.
know were out there. And for me also, I think it was, well, Eben Alexander's book, and I'm trying to think, there was another one, Heaven is for Real, because I had never read any accounts of near-death experiences, and I didn't even think that mine was that, or anything similar. But when I started reading these books, I couldn't believe how much similarity there was between what I experienced without having to go through the trauma of
Yeah.
nearly dying and these other experiences. So that to me has been amazing.
So what did you think it was back then before you realized what had happened? Well, I mean, you must have been questioning what the heck was that? What was that all about?
Yeah,
And
I guess I felt like it was just something that was a gift for me. And in my book, I think there's one or two paragraphs about it, because I just didn't think it was that big of a deal per se.
yeah.
It was just an experience, but it was so helpful. And now I know it was so much more than just a 2-paragraph experience.
Yeah, exactly. Much, much more. So tell us about your life today, Lisa. Tell us about what you're up to and how this experience has founded who you've become.
Right. Well, now today I'm living in Maui, Hawaii. I've really followed my life's path, my breadcrumbs, as I'll say. I think so. What happened right after my husband died, 4 months later, actually, is when I met my second husband, David, and it was such a perfect connection for me at that time. And his father had just died 6 weeks before my husband had. And so when we got together, it was just the perfect, combination. He was looking for family and I was looking for a husband, and, it all came together. And again, in my book, it talks all about the amazing synchronicities of that. And it was beautiful. However, after 13 years and my spirituality continuing to grow and my desire to move to Hawaii and all of that, ultimately we ended up divorcing a year and a half ago because we had just gone on 2 separate paths.
Yeah.
So although it was a beautiful conscious uncoupling and we both still love each other dearly, it just wasn't, leading us both where we needed to be. So here I am in Maui, Hawaii, and I'm following my passion, and it's all about shining light on death and helping people to lose the fear around death and help people to overcome their grief.
Oh my goodness, sounds amazing. I just think you're so spot on with that. From what I can tell, you're absolutely doing that. So, Lisa Jones, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your shared death experience. What a beautiful experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.